Thank you. Thanks a lot. Oh, I have a microphone, I think, if they turn it on.
Facebook Live.
Ah, for Facebook Live. So this and this. Hello, my friends out there in TV land, Facebook Live. And hello, thanks for coming. And why are you guys sitting in the back? Yeah, come up a little bit, huh? I promise, when I talk, I don't spit. At least not very much. The guys in the front row might be in trouble, right? So welcome, it's so good to be here. So 1 year ago, I think, approximately, we launched the Ecosphere water purifier, right?
March.
Was anybody here for that?
Yeah.
But I'm sure that lots of you weren't, right? So for those that were here, it's going to be a good refresher, I hope. For those that weren't here, then let's talk about something new, right? So any of you travel a long way to get here?
Yeah. Out of town.
Good. Okay. Everyone speaks English, right? Pretty good. So I will try not to speak too fast. Wow, that introduction, thank you very much. Now I have to wake everyone up again, right? All right, so let's have a look at my first slide. So it was a few years ago, actually, that the management in Southeast Asia asked Corporate and Provo, the research and development team, about the possibility of developing a water purifier. And that's something that we didn't have a lot of experience in. And you know, at New Skin, we really try to produce products that are demonstrably better than anything else, right? So if it's something that can be done by other companies and they've already done it and there's nothing we can do to improve, then it's really hard to do it, and maybe we don't. So let's talk about why we decided we might go into this area, right? Well, first of all, yes, it seems like, except for Singapore, here, that there are issues with water quality in most of Southeast Asia, right? So we are ranked here about 2/3 of the way down. Out of 178 countries measuring access, whoops, I'm treading on lights here, access to drinking water or sanitation, where are we in the Philippines? About 103rd. So it seems like, yes, there's something that we can do here, right? And in other countries around Southeast Asia. So what did we do? Well, let's talk about water and where it comes from. Two major sources of water are the groundwater, which means, you know, water that's under the ground, that's in pockets between the rocks and things like that. And in Utah, where I come from, in the desert, a lot of the water that we get is groundwater, right? And in fact, where I live in the mountains, it's about, 1.5 kilometers altitude. That's why it snows so much and it's kind of cold in the winter. But we have these springs, and where I live in my town, the water is so clean and so pure that comes out of those springs that you really don't need to treat it. You can just drink it. It's very clean. It's not a big city, so there's no agriculture in the mountains. There's no factories there. It's the snow that melts and goes into the groundwater, and then the springs come and provide it, right? But that's really rare these days. Most countries in the world, most areas have a lot of things going on. We have agriculture, right? Where nearly always in agriculture we're using fertilizers and pesticides. And what happens when it rains? Basically, when that happens, it goes into the surface water, right? The lakes and the ponds and the reservoirs, and also the groundwater. These fertilizers and pesticides and all these things end up in the water. And are those okay to drink? Well, I really don't like having pesticides in my water, right? And the fertilizers, yeah, probably not so much. And they probably grow things also in the water that aren't good, right? And then industry may be even worse, right? Where you have harmful chemicals, leakage of fuels, all sorts of things that ultimately end up there. And then you have even from houses, right? So, oh look, this is a New Skin house. But even in a New Skin house we have the potty, right? And people are taking a lot of pharmaceuticals these days, right? And the pharmaceuticals, they end up in the urine and then basically end up recycling back into the groundwater and the surface water. So now you have all sorts of things then that are getting into the water. And our councils and governments do a really good job then. What their job is to provide safe, clean drinking water for our communities. And they do this a number of ways, right? So now we're going to suck up that water, and we have different things that we can do. We can get out the sediment, right? So they have these ponds maybe where the sand and the gravel will go to the bottom. And then we have these chemicals that we use that agglomerate, so sort of help to get all of those solids out of the water. And then finally, chlorination, right? Where the chlorine will then kill all the bacteria and things like that. So now your water is beautiful and clean, right? And yeah, you're going to get some chlorine, which can add to a taste and maybe not be so good for you, and maybe not so good for the bacteria in your tummy that's friendly. But it's certainly a small price to pay for having water that you can drink right out of the faucet, right? So it's really good. The problem is that the chlorine doesn't remove some of these other things that we talked about, right? So there are other things in the water perhaps that you need to be concerned about, heavy metals or pesticides, fertilizers, things like that. So we do the best we can, and I like this water. But now what happens is that water needs to get to your house. So now you consider how far is that chlorination plant from your house? And what do the pipes look like between that plant and your house? Because in most countries, it's not a brand new infrastructure, right? So you've got some, rusty pipes, and sometimes there's lead or copper. Sometimes it's not all that secure, so things can still get into it. So now, so between here and my house, there may be still some issues. It's not perfect. So basically, we want really good water, right? So what do you do in your house to make sure the water is clean? Do you drink it straight out of the faucet? Most people will boil it, right, or do something. So, this is one thing, right? We get water shipped to our house, or we buy lots of these bottles. And that's great. It's really interesting that, this has really cropped up in the last few years, more and more. You can just buy water anywhere. What I find is really interesting is that sometimes, at least in America, the water that you buy in some stores is more expensive than the gasoline for your car, right? On a per gallon basis, it's like, wow, why am I paying so much? It's just water. These oil companies should just give up and sell water, right? So it does lead to some issues, right? It's expensive, it does add up. And then also it's environmentally very unfriendly. We're seeing, all this plastic, not all of it gets recycled. So there's a lot of buildup of these water bottles. And in general, the water quality is good, right? But I did add this last point because I watched Slumdog Millionaire. I don't know if you remember that show, but they thought they were buying clean water, but the guys in the back were just like super gluing the caps on the bottles. They were just using tap water. So that doesn't happen here, but I don't know, sometimes I wonder, right? So the solution that we talked about is a lot of people boil the water, right? So does boiling the water fix all of the problems, I guess, is the question. I certainly trust water that's been boiled more than just water out of a lake or a pond or out of the faucet, right? It's good because boiling the water will kill the bacteria, right? If you boil it long enough. And if you boil it long enough still, you can even kill the viruses. So great, no more microbes, so I'm not going to get immediately sick from the water, so that's great. But there are some downsides, right? Does boiling the water, does it get rid of any heavy metals or pesticides or pharmaceuticals or anything that might be in there? No, it doesn't. In fact, boiling the water sort of concentrates it a little bit. So maybe it's even a little bit more concentrated than before. It will get rid of the chlorine, right? If you let the water sit for a few hours or overnight, or if you boil it, the chlorine's gone, which is also nice. Sometimes that improves the taste. The chlorine has done its job, right? But there are some downsides. It doesn't do everything. So boiling is, while it's better than nothing, is not the whole answer, right? So the solution then that we find is, yes, if you can filter the water at that last point before you drink it, that's a really good way to help, right? And I want to talk a little bit about that solution then. So where do we go from here? If you want a filter, I guess the big question is, Well, what kind of filter? What's that going to look like? What's available today? So by the time we finish tonight, you and all our friends in Facebook land are going to, I think, have a really good idea of what the options are and why the product that we're bringing to you from Nu Skin is a really nice option compared to all of the options that you may have, right? So let's talk about that. So, first of all, as I mentioned, it was a few years ago that we were asked to do this, and good research can't be done overnight. I immediately put my team on this. Who's the best team at Nu Skin to work on this water filter issue? Well, the team that I have is the team that built the biophotonic scanner, right? So that is my team, my crack scientists that are really experienced and really good at finding the research and applying it. So that's what they did. They went out to all of the trade shows, they read the publications, they went to manufacturers, they went to lectures on water and water filtration, and they became familiar with all of the types of technologies that are being used. And their first report to me was a little discouraging. They came to me and they said, Mark, we can't find anything really new in this space. Like all of the technology that is out there, it's all stuff that they've been using for years. And it seems to work, but how is Nu Skin going to be any different, right? And if that's the case, then we were at the point where we thought, well, maybe we need to go and report to Southeast Asia. You really should look in your local market. We can't find any improvement that we can make, because what we want to do is be able to offer something to you that's better than anything that's out there. But we persisted. We kept looking. We kept, we needed to dig a little deeper into this technology and see, are there some things? So one of the things that we built it from the inside out, right? That's the most important thing is, what are those technologies? We didn't just want to build something pretty for you or something that's a different color, right? We needed to make sure that the technology works. That's where we started, right? So looking at, again, all of the different options. This is what I was talking about earlier. What kind of technology is there? This is one area though, right? So I mentioned that the technologies, there wasn't all that much new. But we did discover that there was one area that was sadly lacking. Anyone know what that is? I think it's inside a car, right? Right? So the reason I'm showing this picture is because these days it's very hard to work on a car. And most of us do not know how to rebuild a car engine, right? And most of us probably don't know how to plumb your house or do complicated things like that. You want it to be easier. And this is where we find there was an issue, right? That the user experience. What we did was this is one of the fun things that I do with my job, is I have this budget and we can order things online, right? So we went to different companies and we ordered water filters from all over. Some were expensive, some were cheap, right? Some you needed a plumber to put in your house, and some were mostly sort of countertop versions. And this is the kind of thing that we saw. We found that they needed a lot of assembly. There are a lot of lines and diverters and power cables. You would open the box and you would see stuff like this, and you go, well, I'm not sure where this one goes, and how do I cut that pipe? And then when I connect it, because it's so complicated, is it going to leak here, right? So there are lots of user experience issues when we got these filters. This is actually literally a picture when one of them arrived, and this is quite typical. You open the box, this is what you find. And then you find that the instructions for assembly are not very clear either, right? They're written maybe by someone where Chinese is the first language. And so all the verbs and the nouns are mixed up and back to front, and you try your best, but it's not easy, right? So that was an issue, user experience. So we thought, wow, this is something that we really could improve upon. Okay, so let's chalk that one up. Technology, maybe we can't improve, I don't know, but certainly user experience is something that we thought we can work on that. That's something that Nu Skin is really good at, right? And then we did do some surveys amongst our potential market, right? What kind of water filter do you want? Now that we know that there are some options, there are some that need to be installed by a plumber, and there are some that you can just put on your countertop, right? And overwhelmingly in this market, we found that people didn't want to have to use a plumber. We wanted something on the countertop, right? And so the size does matter. And also the beauty then matters if it's on your countertop, right? So do you want this on your countertop? It's taking up quite a lot of room and it's kind of ugly, right? And we found that that was a very common thing as well. So this is great. It looks like it's a 3-stage filter. You know, it's got some really good components to it, but a little bit complicated. And how many of you would like to change the filter on that thing? Right? It's just another user experience type issue, right? Where, again, these things are not easy. From personal experience, my wife recently renovated the kitchen. I don't know how much it cost, I really don't want to know. But when we got our new kitchen, we found something like this under the sink. And she renovated the kitchen 5 years ago, and I still have not changed any filters. I don't know when to change it. I don't know how to change it. I don't know who to order the filter from. I don't even know what brand the filter is, right? So is it still working? Or, you know, when we press the button and water comes out, is it really the same as the faucet? I don't know. So that's an issue, right? And I have rebuilt car engines. I like doing that kind of stuff. But I don't have time for this. I don't know where to start, right? So that user experience, again, when it comes to replacing the filters, does matter. That's where we found a gap. Here, this is a picture of a reverse osmosis system. And reverse osmosis, I'm not sure if you've heard of these systems, have you? So, you know, when you go to buy your water, maybe it's done by reverse osmosis. It does a very good job. You know, this is one of the things that we learned, is it's kind of a gold standard in water. But there are some unknown secrets about reverse osmosis water filtration. Did you know that for every gallon or for every liter that you get out of that's fresh, then it's going to use 4 liters of water, right? So you want 1 liter, you've actually used up 5 liters. If you want 1 gallon, you've used up 5 gallons. That 4 selling companies, all sorts of things that are selling these alkali water generators, right? And so when we started doing this, no offense to our staff in Southeast Asia, but they asked us, well, have you considered alkali? And my team said, alkali? Why would we consider that? I said, well, isn't there something to that? I mean, everyone's raving about it. They're talking about the health benefits of alkali water. If you have alkali water, then it's going to help prevent cancer. That's true, right? I mean, that's what they're claiming. You heard that? So are you curious about that? Yeah. So this is interesting because my first degree is in biochemistry. And one thing that I learned in biochemistry is that the body regulates the pH very, very tightly. So when we talk about alkali, we're talking about pH, right? Oh, is there a whiteboard? Yep. Cool, thank you. They are so good. They can see that look in my eye, like I need something. And they were worried that I was going to write on the wall over here. So now, okay, so pH is about acid and base, right? So on one side you've got acid, and on this side you've got base, or the other word for that is alkali, right? How do you spell alkali? Alkaline. Right? So alkaline is another word for basic. And where is the body? The body is right in the middle, pH 7.4, right? So the idea then is, if you have water that's not neutral and not acid, but actually slightly alkaline, that somehow that is better for your health. So again, having studied biochemistry and a particular branch of physiology called homeostasis. Oh, I'm looking for the cap. There we go. Thanks. I don't want to get high over here while I'm trying to talk. Right, having studied that, I realized that the body is really good at maintaining a very narrow pH, 7.4. That's the body's pH. That's the pH kind of in the blood. And the enzymes of your body don't work very well if it gets outside of that range very much, even a little bit. Now, do you know why? Well, pH is a log scale. What does that mean? Logarithmic scale. Let me give you an example. Okay, we don't have earthquakes very much where I live, but you've probably experienced an earthquake of maybe 4 on the Richter scale. Have you all? Man, that's crazy. What was that like? Okay, so you know what that feels like. An earthquake that is a 5 on the Richter scale is bigger. How much bigger? How much bigger is a 5 earthquake than a 4 earthquake? A little bit bigger? It's 10 times bigger, because the Richter scale is a logarithmic scale. So now let's look at an earthquake that's a 6 on the Richter scale. How much bigger than a 4 is a 6? 100 times more powerful. That's amazing, right? So, you know, you start to think of a 7, that's 1,000 times more powerful. So it's important to understand that a logarithmic scale, every point that it goes up or down is 10 times more or 10 times less, right? So now you think about the difference between, well, what's acid? Acid is really how many of these hydrogen ions there are. And base is really how many hydroxide ions, right? You don't have to know what that is, but just realize we are counting these protons. And something that's really acid has a lot of these, and something that's neutral doesn't have any, right? So, a pH of 1 is over here, and a pH of 14 is over here, right? And this is 0. So you can have a pH of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I guess it's not really 0, is it? 7 is 0. 8 to 14. Right, so if this has 1,000,000 hydrogen ions, 1,000, right? How many is this going to have a pH 2? It's going to have 10 times less, right? 100,000. And this is going to have 10,000. This is going to have 1,000. This is going to have 100, right? Okay. So alkali water is kind of over here. It's got a hydroxide ion. It's got one of these, right? One hydroxide ion, and the next one's going to have 10, 1,000, and so on. When you drink your alkali water, it's not very strong, because you're not drinking, you know, like Drano or something. That would be really bad. So you've got alkali water. It's maybe pH 8. I don't know what it is. Anyone know the pH of alkali water? It's not going to be very strong. You've got one hydroxide ion, and now you're going to dump it into your stomach. What's the pH of your stomach? No, it's actually here. You have acid in your stomach, really nasty, strong acid, right? And when you drink your glass of water with one little bit of OH ion, and you dump it into 1,000,000 hydrogen ions, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever. So your body is not even going to feel it. But even if your body did feel it, it has a buffering system. So if it ever gets one side or the other of pH 7.4, then it will correct it immediately. Your blood pH is not going to change. The cell pH is not going to change. No matter what you do almost, it's not going to change. So alkali water is not going to change anything. Right? So, okay, you can forget the chemistry if you want. I've got two more arguments for you. One, okay, so if it works, if alkali water works, then the way to find it is to look in the literature, the scientific literature. So we looked in the scientific literature. You know, maybe there's something I'm missing here. I've studied biochemistry. It doesn't make sense to me. This is what makes sense to me. So, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I missed a new discovery in science. Let's look at the literature. And so you can go and search online, Medline, some of these databases, public databases, PubMed. Search for all the references, anything to do with alkali diets or alkali water, right? And if you search, you might find about 8,000 if you Google, 8,000 different sort of references to it. But of those, only one study actually rose to the level of scientific sort of credibility. There's one study on cancer and alkaline diets and water. And that one study shows it makes no difference, that there's no correlation between alkali diets or water and your health. Okay, so that's reason number two. If you don't understand the biochemistry, that's okay. You don't have to believe me. What does the literature say? It says there's nothing there. You can't find a doctor in the world with any credibility that will tell you, yes, it makes a difference. Okay? And then, what's the third argument? I can't remember. Okay, so the biochemistry doesn't work out and the literature certainly doesn't work, right? So you can be pretty confident that there's really nothing there to the alkali water argument. So I guess maybe the third point is, well, who thought this up? Where did this come from? Where did it come from? Why did somebody think that alkalinity will help sort of somehow prevent cancer or be good for your health? Well, I know exactly where that came from. Because when I used to work, I mean, this is my area after biochemistry, then I worked in cancer research for several years. I worked at the National Cancer Institute. If you listen to my biography, you might have heard that. It's true. And what we do in cancer research is often we grow cancer cells in petri dishes. So you've seen those petri dishes, right? We have these petri dishes, and you can put cancer cells in there, and they grow. You have to put a culture medium in there, right? Which, by the way, is buffered, so that if you add some acid or add some base, it doesn't matter, it stays the same. Even liquids can do that. Our body is amazing, but even liquids, we make buffers when we do cell culture, right? So you can grow these cancer cells in cell culture. And there was one lab that thought, well, I wonder if the cells grow better if I increase or decrease the pH, make it, base or acid. And in that lab, they discovered that cancer cells grow a little bit better if it's a little bit more acid. So, okay, so somebody read that study somewhere and then thought, whoa, here's a marketing opportunity. Let's sell alkali water and tell people that the studies prove that acid is going to promote the growth of cancer, so you need to go base. But they forgot the basic thing, and that is that first, your stomach is pH 1, so it's going to make no difference. Second, your body buffers and it doesn't change. It's always going to be pH 7.4, right? You're going to be very sick if your pH changes much outside of that range. So it really just came from test tube studies that have no relevance whatsoever to the human body. Does that make sense? I hope I've convinced you. I gave a talk one time in Provo, Utah. There were like 500 people there. And I was talking about Life Pack, and I was talking about antioxidants. You've heard my talks. I was talking about the biophotonic scanner. I was talking about eating healthy and our supplements. And when I finished my talk, I was going back to my office, and this I remember him very clearly, a tall man with silver gray hair, just a very handsome gentleman with like steel blue eyes. And he came to me and he said, Dr. Bartlett, thank goodness you are teaching these people exactly what I've believed all my life. that alkali water is going to save your health. And I was like, what? Did I say that? I don't remember saying that. I was like, yeah, everything that you said about antioxidants and about inflammation, it's all about alkali water. I was like, wow, I guess I didn't get the point across. Hopefully today I got the point across. I'm telling you that there's nothing to it, right? All right, thank you. My clicker is here somewhere. All right, so we, my team and I really said, you know what? Alkali water, maybe it tastes good. Maybe there's something in the water that makes it taste good, and I'm all for that. That's no problem. If Southeast Asia wants the water to taste good, maybe we can make it alkali, but really it's nothing to do with filtration, right? So that we can wipe that one out off the board, right? So the next thing then is design. Remember that I showed that some of the filters that you see really aren't that pretty. So we thought, well, okay, we've talked about user experience. That's something that we can help with. And then what about design? We actually happen to have, I like telling you inside stories, so let me tell you another inside story. How many of you like the design of our biophotonic scanner, the S3? Isn't it beautiful? It looks like something that Apple would make, doesn't it? It's got this beautiful shiny white, it's this triangle color, it's comfortable to put your hand on. It's just really sleek and beautiful. And the way that it interacts with the iPad, right? Have you ever operated the app? Do you like the app? Okay, so here's the secret. We actually, when it came to the design of that scanner, you know, we asked other design companies to build that for us and to give us sort of concepts. And they weren't all that great looking. But we have this one guy who's a millennial, just this young guy. He's about 35, but he really looks like he's about 25 or maybe even 17. And his name is Jesse, and he just does a really good job of design. And so he really put some designs together that just look really good. So we fired that other company, and we had that design. And then when it came to the app, we thought, well, we could spend $2 or $3 million with another company, because other companies do apps, right? So we had this other company, or a couple of other companies, sort of submit their ideas for what the user interface would look like on the app for the scanner. And what we got back wasn't what we wanted. It just wasn't sleek. It wasn't like Apple-esque, right? And so Jesse was saying, well, what about this? And what about this? And you know, those designers in those companies got really mad at us. And they said, well, if you already know what you want, why are you asking us, right? And so we said, okay, Jesse, you can design it. So the Apple, our scanner and our beautiful app, right, is all designed internally. We wrote the app, and Jesse really did all of that user interface, and it's beautiful. You have to agree, it just works so well. It looks so new skin, right? So we thought, well, we've got a history of designing really nice user interface, user experience. So let's get our guy to design our water filter. What should it look like? And so he did design that water filter, right? This is what it looks like, right? So what we've talked about so far then is the design, what it looks like, and how proud are you to have something that looks really pretty on your countertop in your kitchen, right? The experience, right? You want it to be easy. You don't want to have an engineering degree to put all the pipes together, right? It needs to look pretty, and it needs to have a really easy installation. It needs to be easy to change the filter. All of those things, that's where maybe we can really help. And then the technology. Okay, so let's go back to that. How can we improve the technology? Because I already mentioned that a lot of this is kind of same old, right? Well, we thought, well, maybe what we should just do is make sure it's a really good design, a really good user experience, and then bring all of the best technologies together as well. Now maybe we've got something that's a little bit magic in a water filter that our new skin people would be proud of, right? So let's talk about now some of those things. Well, there's the design again, sleek, premium, small footprint, closed, easy system. Oh, and here's another thing that we found, right? So when you go, I don't know if you've ever gone to someone's house that has a water filter on the benchtop. And have you ever said, how do I get a glass of water out of this thing? And then you call the owner of the house, hey, can you tell me which knob to turn? Or, what's right, what's wrong, I don't know. And they come along and say, oh yeah, I'm glad you called me because, over the last few months, this is starting to get a little bit stiff. And they're turning the knob, right? And there are these chrome taps and things. And well, look at this. This is one thing that we found from one company that was just really nice. I'll show you another picture of it later, but it just made it really easy and beautiful. These are the dimensions of the product. So if you fold a piece of A4 paper in half, you get A5, right? And that's how big it is sitting on your countertop. We wanted to make sure for the user experience and the beauty that everything was as much pre-assembly as possible so that you didn't have to mess with, every attachment that you make maybe leaks, right? So a 3-in-1 cable, right, combined into a single one, a power cable that's attached. This is that diverter again, which is electronic, right? So you just have to tap it. You tap it if you want. Oh, what happens if I tap this one? It's going to be tap water, right? And if I go and I tap this one, thunk, then it's drinking water. So easy. You don't have to turn any knobs, crank anything down, right? It literally is, you don't even have to press it. You just touch it. So nice. So I said, if we're going to make a water filter, we've got to get this. One way or another, we have to buy this. Nothing else. It's so nice. Right? And then again, with the user experience, we want fast, easy installation. When it's time to replace the filter, we need to know when, and we want it to be really easy. We don't want wastewater. We already talked about that, right? We want to conserve water, and water is precious, so let's not waste it. And we want it to be easy to use, right? And when it comes to the adapter, that's another issue, right? So there's a bunch of different, depending upon whose house you go to, you take off that aerator, and then there's a thread there, and it has to match the thread of whatever it is you're using. So with ours, it comes with 6, and one of them, 99% of the time, one of those will work. So you just screw that on, and then click, you're done. Right? Very easy. The filter, it's got to be really easy to change. So we have, you saw with most filters they're multi-stage. I'll talk more about that later. We wanted to do 3-in-1 so that you don't have to change 3 different filters and keep track of them all. Just change one. And it's got to be really easy. So to take it out, you just turn it a quarter turn and pull it out. And then you put the new one in and it's a quarter turn, right? So no plumbing, no tools, no filters exposed, no disassembly required, just really super easy, right? Otherwise you may never change it like I don't at home, right? And you know where to order it from too, right? To say, hey, Nu Skin, I need a new filter, right? So, now the materials of the product. These days it seems like everything comes from China. And that's okay because sometimes you basically get what you pay for. You can get cheap stuff or you can get expensive stuff. But not always the best stuff, right? So let me talk a little bit, just in the interest of transparency, about where everything is coming from. Premium materials does make a difference. Oh, maybe I'll talk about it later. Okay, my slide is not maybe it doesn't cover it. I don't know. We'll talk about that later. Okay, so now it's time to talk about the science. Can we make a difference in the technology that we're using? What is the best technology that we found? Because that's what we want to use. Now that we've decided there's a user experience gap and there's a beauty gap that we can solve, now let's talk about what we put on the inside of the filter. So it's a 3-in-1 cartridge that I mentioned. The first stage, the first thing that the water has to do is bypass this polypropylene pleated pre-filter, right? And it goes all the way down the outside of this filter. So water goes in and it has to somehow enter through that pre-filter. The second part is the compressed carbon block. I'll talk more about that later too. It has to now go through that compressed carbon before it can go into the next part, which is the polyether sulfone membrane down here. So it's traveled through the pleated pre-filter, through the carbon block, down into this polyether sulfone membrane, and then finally into this area that has the ultraviolet light. All right, so the pleated filter, that's the first stage. This is really important because there may be some undissolved type solids, right? A little bit of, I don't know, maybe you can't even see it, a little bit of turbidity or something from sand or some fine silt. And so this will protect the rest of the filter. We want to capture it in that first part. It's quite tall, right? Because it's going all the way down here. But you see it's very dense and it is pleated. That gives it a really nice surface area so that it will last the life of the rest of the filter. The second stage is really where the magic happens, the compressed carbon block. So carbon blocks are really, this is the workhorse of the filter, right? So let's talk a little bit about what it does. You've got sort of these little holes in the carbon, and it's really just kind of like charcoal. Do you know what it's made from? It's actually mostly made from coconut husks, right? So if you heat the coconut husk with a very little amount of oxygen, then it turns into charcoal, and then you can do all sorts of things with that charcoal. It's very interesting. Even on its own, it's actually very good at eliminating odors and capturing organic chemicals. So, you know, whether it's chlorine or pharmaceuticals or pesticides or even some heavy metals, they get captured in this filter. And it's really good for the volatile organic compounds, the things that sort of give an odor that is unpleasant to the water. It will remove those as well. But carbon isn't just carbon, right? Charcoal, we're not just putting sort of, let's burn some coconuts and shove those into a container. Even though that actually would work to a certain extent, there are things that you can do to supercharge the carbon. And what that's called activating the carbon. And what they do is you can blast steam through the charcoal. And that then causes all these tiny little pores. And this is called activated charcoal. An activated carbon or activated charcoal is thousands of times more potent than ordinary carbon because it's got all these fine channels. So it opens up the surface area so that, you know, like a tablespoon, I don't know the exact numbers, but a tablespoon is like the surface area of a tennis court. It's just huge, has a great amount of potential now. So it can be used for all sorts of applications. So the next thing is, okay, do we use granulated carbon or a carbon block? Now granulated carbon is actually still works really well, right? The water trickles down through all of this and it interacts with the carbon and it cleans it. How much time have I got? When am I supposed to stop? Sorry? 7:15? Oh, I don't have much time. Are you guys going to be late for anything if I go over a little bit?
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, good. Because I got a story to tell you about, you know, even the most primitive of filters, right? I love to go backpacking. I was a scout leader. I've got my own boys. And in Utah, we've got desert, like miles of desert. So we recently did a 3-day hike into the middle of the desert. And when we went into the desert, I've done this before. And so what usually happens is it rains, and in the rocks, you get these puddles of water. And you bring a filter with you, and you can filter the water, and we can drink for days, right? You can't, you know, on these long hikes, you can't carry all the water with you because it's really heavy. But this year, it was drier than usual. So as I was going through these slot canyons, and we were, you know, ropes coming down into the next canyon, and then we would walk another couple of miles and then down another rock canyon. And I'm like, there's no water. Like all the places that were here last year are now dry. And so I was thinking, wow, we've got 2 more days on this hike and we're low on water. What are we going to do? I thought the next water we find, we're going to have to filter it. And so the next water I found was nasty. It was green. It had like, you know, all this green stuff floating on it. There was a dead